She looked at me before her work party and said, "Stay home. I'm embarrassed to introduce you as my husband." I nodded, said, "Of course," and immediately logged into our shared account, downloaded every transaction, copied her messages from the cloud, and booked a courier. My name is Drake Torin, and I'm a cybersecurity consultant. Former military, current nobody, at least according to my wife, Avon. She's a PR executive with ambitions bigger than our penthouse apartment overlooking Portside Harbor. Tonight, she was heading to another one of her networking events, where apparently my presence would damage her carefully crafted image. I watched her apply lipstick in our bedroom mirror, her reflection showing no trace of guilt or second thought about what she'd just said. She wore the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she claimed was too expensive when I suggested she wear it for our dinner that night. Funny how it was perfect for impressing her colleagues. "Don't wait up," she said, grabbing her purse. "These things run late." "I'm sure they do," I replied, already pulling up our shared cloud storage on my laptop. The door clicked shut, and I got to work. 20 years in military intelligence teaches you a few things about information gathering. Avon thought she was clever, but she'd made the classic mistake of underestimating the quiet guy in the corner. Our shared account painted an interesting picture. Hotel charges on nights she claimed to be working late. Expensive dinners for two when she said she was grabbing fast food. Gift purchases I'd never received. The digital breadcrumbs led straight to a pattern I'd suspected, but never confirmed. Then I found the messages. "Can't wait to see you tonight, V. Drake's staying home like always. He never suspects anything. Your husband sounds like a real winner. Lucky me, getting the upgrade. Just a few more months and I'll have everything sorted. Then we can stop sneaking around. V. Vance Monroe, her boss. The married man she'd been gushing about for months, always careful to mention his wife and kids whenever she brought him up. Classic misdirection. I screenshot everything, backed up the files, and started packing. By midnight, I had her clothes folded neatly in suitcases, her jewelry organized in travel cases, and her work laptop secured with all the cables. I even included the expensive perfume she'd been hoarding for special occasions. Changing the locks was easy. The apartment lease was in my name, a fact Avon had conveniently forgotten during her little speech earlier. I printed the divorce papers I'd been preparing for weeks, along with a neat folder containing highlights from her digital confession. At 2 a.m., she tried to enter the apartment and found her life on the hallway floor. The note was simple. "You have nothing to be ashamed of anymore. The divorce papers are inside." I heard her key scraping uselessly in the lock, followed by confused muttering, then the sound of zippers as she checked the suitcases. My phone buzzed with calls I didn't answer. Then came the pounding on the door. "Drake, open this door right now. This is ridiculous." I poured myself a whiskey and settled into my chair, listening to her escalating panic through the reinforced door. She wasn't calling me anymore. She was calling someone else. Vance, probably, based on the tone shift from angry to pleading. "I need somewhere to stay tonight. He found out about us. No, I don't know how much he knows. Can you pick me up?" The hallway went quiet 20 minutes later. I checked the security camera feed. The suitcases were gone, and so was my wife. The next morning brought the counterattack. Avon had spent the night strategizing instead of reflecting. She filed a complaint with her company's security department, claiming I'd stolen proprietary information from her work laptops. Then came the abuse allegations, a restraining order request claiming I'd threatened her and destroyed her property. Smart moves if you're dealing with an amateur. Unfortunately for Avon, I'd spent 2 decades learning how to cover my tracks and anticipate enemy tactics. I responded by forwarding her boss the backup emails she'd forgotten to delete. The folder I sent contained expense reports for personal trips, charged to company accounts, falsified client meeting records to cover affair meetups, and hotel receipts that coincided perfectly with supposed business conferences that never existed. The recorded call was the masterpiece, a conversation between Avon and her friend Cassie, where they discussed framing me for domestic violence to gain advantage in the divorce proceedings. Avon had pocket-dialed me during their planning session, and my phone had automatically saved the voicemail. HR opened an internal investigation within hours. The restraining order was denied when I provided evidence that Avon had been systematically defrauding her employer and planning to file false accusations. The judge was particularly interested in the timeline showing her affair had been ongoing for 8 months. That evening, I sent one final file to her parents and her entire office contact list, a comprehensive timeline proving the affair had started before our marriage, complete with hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and text message screenshots. The subject line read, "The Real Avon Torin, a Timeline of Deception." By nightfall, she'd lost her job, her cover story, and access to every shared account. I kept the apartment. She kept the suitcases, but this was just the opening move. My neighbor, Mrs. Vanders, knocked on my door the next morning with coffee and gossip. She was 70-something with sharp eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's business in our building. "That was quite the commotion last night," she said, settling into my kitchen chair like she belonged there. "I saw that man helping her with the suitcases. Tall fellow, expensive car. Not the type I'd expect to see doing manual labor." "Vance Monroe," I said, pouring myself coffee. "Her boss. Former boss, from what I heard on the elevator this morning. Building maintenance mentioned she won't be needing her parking spot anymore." Mrs. Vanders stirred her coffee slowly. "Shame about marriages these days, though I did notice he'd been visiting quite regularly when you were traveling for work." I looked up from my cup. "How regularly?" "Tuesday and Thursday evenings, mostly. Sometimes weekend afternoons when you were at that gym of yours. Always parked in the visitor spot, always left before midnight. Very considerate of the parking regulations." The old woman had been documenting Avon's affair without realizing it. I made a mental note to send her a nice fruit basket. My phone buzzed with a text from Rex, my old army buddy who now ran a private investigation service in downtown Portside. "Heard you might need some professional consultation. Coffee?" An hour later, I was sitting across from Rex at the Dockyard, a blue-collar bar where the beer was cold and the conversations were private. Rex looked exactly like you'd expect a former military investigator to look. Weathered face, careful eyes, and the kind of handshake that reminded you he'd seen things most people only watch in movies. "So your wife decided to trade up," he said, reviewing the file I'd brought. "Classic corporate affair, boss and subordinate, secret meetings, company resources. How long you been tracking this?" "Officially? Since last night. Unofficially? I suspected something months ago when she started working late every Tuesday and Thursday." Rex nodded. "Tuesdays and Thursdays. Interesting pattern. Most cheaters vary their schedule to avoid detection. These two got comfortable." He pulled out his tablet and showed me surveillance photos taken outside Vance's office building. Avon and Vance entering together after business hours, leaving separately. The timestamps matched perfectly with her late work nights. "I've been documenting this for another client," Rex explained. "Vance's wife hired me 3 weeks ago. She suspected something but didn't have proof. Your wife just became evidence in someone else's divorce case." The irony was perfect. While Avon was planning to destroy my reputation, she was simultaneously destroying her lover's marriage. Amateur hour. "What's your play here, Drake? You've already won the divorce. Her credibility is shot, she's unemployed, and you've got documentation of everything. Most guys would call it a victory and move on." I finished my beer and looked out the window at Portside's downtown district. Somewhere in those glass towers, Vance Monroe was probably scrambling to contain the damage from Avon's spectacular implosion. He'd used his position to seduce my wife, helped her plan to frame me for abuse, and thought he was clever enough to avoid consequences. "She said she was embarrassed to introduce me as her husband," I told Rex. "Said it in our bedroom, looking me straight in the eye, like I was something shameful she needed to hide. Then she walked out to meet her lover at a party I'd helped pay for." Rex leaned back in his chair. So this isn't about winning the divorce. The divorce was just the opening move. This is about making sure she never forgets the cost of humiliating someone who trusted her. And Monroe? He's collateral damage. Should have thought twice before helping my wife plan to destroy me. Rex grinned, the expression of a man who'd seen enough betrayals to appreciate a well-planned response. What do you need? Information, schedules, patterns. I want to know where they go, who they talk to, and how they're planning to rebuild their lives. Then I want to be there when those plans fall apart. That's going to cost you. I slid an envelope across the table. Down payment. There's more when we're finished. Rex opened the envelope and whistled softly. How much more are we talking about? Enough to make this the most thorough investigation you've ever conducted. I want to know everything about both of them. Finances, habits, weaknesses, secrets they think nobody knows. I want a complete picture before I make my next move. And what exactly is your next move? I stood up and dropped money on the table for the beers. Public education. Portside's a small community, and people deserve to know who they're really dealing with when they encounter Avon Torin and Vance Monroe. Rex packed up his tablet and files. You know this could get messy. Monroe's got money and connections. Your wife's probably going to lawyer up once she realizes you're not done with her. Let them bring lawyers. Everything I've done so far has been completely legal, and everything I'm planning to do will be equally legal. I'm just going to make sure the truth gets the attention it deserves. As we walked out of the dockyard, Rex clapped me on the shoulder. You know what I like about you, Drake. Most people talk big about revenge, but don't have the patience to do it right. You're actually thinking this through. 20 years in military intelligence teaches you the value of proper planning. And what did 20 years of marriage teach you? I looked back at the bar, then up at the skyline where Avon was probably hiding in some hotel room, planning her next move. That some people mistake kindness for weakness, and that's a mistake you only get to make once. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly. A. I showed the screen to Rex, who laughed. Looks like the enemy wants to negotiate. Tell me something, Rex. In all your years doing this work, how often do cheaters actually feel genuine remorse for what they've done? Genuine remorse? Almost never. They feel sorry they got caught, sorry they're facing consequences, sorry their plans didn't work out. But actual remorse for the betrayal itself? That's rare. I deleted Avon's message without responding. Then we proceed as planned. The afternoon sun was setting over Portside Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in this city, my wife and her lover were discovering that actions have consequences. Tomorrow, they'd learn that some consequences are just getting started. Rex called me at 6 a.m. with an update that made my morning coffee taste like victory. Monroe's wife filed for divorce yesterday afternoon. She's asking for half of everything plus alimony, and she's citing adultery with documentation. Your wife's little affair just became Exhibit A in a very expensive legal proceeding. I pulled up the local news website while Rex talked. Nothing yet, but Portside's social circles were small enough that this kind of scandal would spread fast once people started talking. There's more, Rex continued. Monroe's been suspended from his position pending an internal review. Apparently, using company resources to conduct an affair violates several corporate policies. His access has been revoked, and security escorted him out yesterday evening. What about Avon? Still unemployed, still staying at the Harborview Hotel downtown. She's been making calls to other PR firms in the area, but word travels fast in professional circles. Nobody wants to hire someone who just got terminated for expense fraud and workplace misconduct. I opened my laptop and began composing emails. If Avon wanted to rebuild her career in Portside, she'd need references and recommendations. Unfortunately for her, I had documentation that would make any potential employer think twice about taking that risk. I need addresses for the major PR and marketing firms in the city, I told Rex. Also contact information for the professional organizations she belongs to. Planning to poison the well? Planning to provide relevant information to people who might be making hiring decisions. It's called due diligence. By noon, I'd sent carefully worded messages to 17 companies and 3 professional organizations. Each email included a brief explanation of Avon's recent termination, along with documentation of her expense fraud and falsified reports. I framed it as a concerned citizen providing information that might be relevant to their hiring processes. The response was immediate. 2 companies called me directly to verify the information. One professional organization suspended her membership pending investigation. By evening, Avon's professional network was buzzing with questions she couldn't answer without admitting guilt. But the real masterpiece was still to come. Cassie Lane had been Avon's closest work friend and partner in gossip for 3 years. She was also ambitious, insecure, and absolutely terrified of being associated with Avon's scandal. When I called her that afternoon, she was more than willing to discuss her former friend's situation. "Drake, I had no idea things were so bad between you two," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Avon always made it sound like you were the problem." "What exactly did she tell you about our marriage?" "Oh, the usual complaints. Said you were boring, didn't understand her career ambitions, held her back socially. She made it sound like she was trapped." "Did she mention her relationship with Vance Monroe?" There was a pause. "She said they were just friends, professional colleagues. I mean, we all knew she had a crush on him, but she always insisted it was nothing serious." "Cassie, I'm going to send you some files. I think you should see what Avon was really doing during those late work sessions you helped cover for." 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. "Drake, I cannot believe what I just read. She was using me to provide alibis for her affair. She told me those hotel receipts were for legitimate business meetings. There's more. Check the folder labeled expense reports." Another pause, longer this time. She was stealing from the company, and she dragged me into it by having me sign off on some of these reports. My signature is on fraudulent documents. "I thought you should know before anyone else connected you to her activities." "What should I do? I could lose my job if anyone thinks I was involved in this." "Distance yourself, publicly. Make it clear you were deceived just like everyone else. Cooperate fully with any investigations. And maybe consider whether you have any information that might help establish the timeline of her deception." "You mean like recordings of our conversations where she talked about the affair?" I sat up straighter. "You recorded your conversations with Avon?" "Not intentionally, but I use a voice memo app to take notes during phone calls, and I never deleted the files. There are hours of conversations where she talked about Monroe, complained about you, and discussed her plans for the divorce." "Cassie, those recordings could be very valuable to the right people. Monroe's wife, for instance, might be interested in hearing exactly when the affair started and what Avon said about it." "You think I should contact Monroe's wife?" "I think you should do whatever you feel is right. But if I were in your position, I'd want to make sure everyone understood that I was a victim of Avon's deception, not an accomplice." 2 hours later, Cassie called Monroe's divorce attorney and volunteered to provide testimony about the affair timeline. She also sent copies of her recorded conversations to the attorney, to Monroe's wife, and to her own HR department to demonstrate her cooperation with their investigation. The recordings were devastating. Hours of Avon describing her affair in explicit detail, mocking her husband's trust, and planning to manipulate the divorce proceedings. Even better, they included conversations where Avon admitted to expense fraud and discussed using company resources for personal trips with Monroe. By evening, Cassie had scheduled a meeting with HR to formally report Avon's misconduct and clear her own name. She also agreed to provide a written statement detailing everything she knew about the affair and the financial irregularities. "I feel terrible about all this," she told me during our final call of the day. "I thought Avon was my friend. She was using you, just like she used everyone else. The only difference is that you were smart enough to document your conversations. What happens now? Now the truth comes out, and everyone involved faces the consequences of their choices. You made the right decision by cooperating with the investigation. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing the day's progress. Avon's professional reputation was in ruins, her personal relationships were dissolving, and her former allies were actively working against her. Monroe was facing divorce, unemployment, and potential legal action for misuse of corporate resources. But I wasn't finished yet. Mrs. Vanders knocked on my door at 9 p.m. with another update from the building's gossip network. "That Monroe fellow was here again this afternoon," she said, settling into her usual chair. "Looked terrible, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, driving a different car. Not the confident man I saw before." "Different car?" "Modest sedan instead of that luxury vehicle. I suspect his wife has made some changes to their financial arrangements." "Did he go up to see Avon?" "Tried to, but she's not staying here anymore. Checked out of the Harborview Hotel this morning, according to my friend who works in housekeeping. Word is, she couldn't afford the room rate after losing her job." "Any idea where she went?" Mrs. Vanders smiled. "Her parents' house in the suburbs. 40-year-old woman moving back home because she destroyed her marriage and career for a man who can't even afford to support her anymore." I poured the old woman a cup of tea and settled in to hear the rest of her report. The building's social network was more efficient than any intelligence agency I'd ever worked with. "There's something else," she continued. "I heard from my nephew who works at the courthouse. Monroe's wife isn't just filing for divorce, she's pressing charges for identity theft and credit card fraud. Apparently, he'd been using her cards to pay for his affair expenses." "How much trouble is he in?" "Enough to make him wish he'd kept his marriage vows. Between the divorce settlement, the legal fees, and the potential criminal charges, he's going to lose everything." I walked Mrs. Vanders to the door and thanked her for the information. As she headed back to her apartment, she paused and looked back at me. "You know, Drake, I've been married for 52 years. I've seen a lot of couples go through difficult times. But what your wife did, that wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. That was calculated cruelty." "I know. Good, because some people deserve exactly what they get." After she left, I stood on my balcony looking out over Portside Harbor. The city lights reflected off the water like stars, beautiful and peaceful. Somewhere out there, Avon was discovering that actions have consequences, and those consequences were just getting started. My phone buzzed with another message from her number. "Please call me. We need to talk about this situation before it gets worse." I deleted the message and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to educate the community about the real character of Avon Torren and Vance Monroe, and I intended to be a very thorough teacher. The next morning brought news that made my breakfast taste like sweet justice. Rex called with an update that exceeded my expectations. "Monroe's arraignment is scheduled for next week. His wife's attorney found evidence of credit card fraud going back 18 months. We're talking about felony charges, Drake. Your wife's boyfriend is looking at potential prison time." I opened my laptop and pulled up the local court records. Public information, all of it, but it painted a picture that would fascinate Portside's social circles. "What's the timeline on his divorce proceedings?" "Fast track. His wife wants him gone, and she's got the documentation to make it happen quickly. She's also filed restraining orders to keep him away from their house and kids. Guy went from corporate executive to homeless defendant in less than a week." "And Avon? Still staying with her parents, still unemployed, still making calls to anyone who might hire her. Problem is, every potential employer who Googles her name finds articles about the corporate scandal. Local Business Journal picked up the story yesterday." I pulled up the article Rex mentioned. The headline read, "Local PR executive terminated for expense fraud and workplace misconduct." It included quotes from unnamed sources describing a pattern of deceptive behavior and misuse of company resources for personal affairs. Perfect. I need you to do something for me, I told Rex. I want to know about every job interview she gets, every application she submits, every professional contact she makes, and I want to know 24 hours before she knows whether she got the position. Planning to interfere with her job search? Planning to provide additional context to employers who might be making decisions based on incomplete information? Rex laughed. You're really not going to let this go, are you? She destroyed 20 years of marriage because she was embarrassed to introduce me as her husband. She planned to frame me for domestic violence to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. She stole from her employer and used her position to conduct an affair that destroyed another family. Why exactly should I let this go? Fair point. What else do you need? Complete financial picture on both of them. Bank accounts, credit cards, assets, debts. I want to know how much money they have to work with and how long they can sustain their current lifestyle. That's going to take some time and resources. Take whatever time you need and use whatever resources are necessary. This is a long-term project. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Frankie's office at the dockyard, reviewing the preliminary financial reports Rex had compiled. Frankie owned the bar, but he also ran an informal information network that covered half of Portside's business community. Your wife's in serious trouble, Frankie said, spreading documents across his desk. She's got credit card debt, no income, and she's burning through her savings fast. Parents are probably supporting her, but they're not wealthy people. What about Monroe? Worse off than her. Wife froze their joint accounts. He's paying legal fees for both criminal and divorce attorneys, and he lost his corporate salary. Guy's probably looking at bankruptcy within 6 months. Frankie pulled out a folder labeled Professional Network Analysis and opened it to reveal a complex chart showing connections between local businesses, professional organizations, and social groups. Here's the interesting part, he continued. Monroe's wife is well connected in Portside's social scene. Country club member, charity board positions, friends with the wives of several major employers. She's been making calls. What kind of calls? The kind that make sure everyone knows exactly what happened and who was responsible. Monroe's not just facing legal and financial problems, he's being socially ostracized. Same thing's happening to your wife. I studied the chart, noting the interconnected relationships that formed Portside's professional and social hierarchy. In a city this size, reputation mattered more than credentials. Once you were marked as untrustworthy, opportunities disappeared fast. There's something else you should know, Frankie said. Monroe tried to get a job at 3 different companies last week. All 3 turned him down after the background checks. Word is that he's considering leaving Portside entirely. Running away? Smart move, actually. His reputation here is destroyed. Fresh start somewhere else might be his only option. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. What would it take to make sure potential employers in other cities knew about his background? Frankie grinned. Professional reference checks are standard practice. If someone were to create a comprehensive database of his legal troubles, financial problems, and ethical violations, that information might find its way to the right people. Hypothetically speaking. Of course. Hypothetically, such a database might also include information about his former subordinate who helped him defraud his previous employer. You know, for completeness. That would be very thorough. I believe in providing complete information to help people make informed decisions. That afternoon, I received a call from Avon's mother. Margaret Winters had always disapproved of me, considering her daughter too good for a simple security consultant. Her tone today suggested her opinion hadn't improved. Drake, we need to discuss this situation with Avon. She's very upset about the things you've been saying about her. I haven't been saying anything about her, Margaret. I've simply been providing factual information to people who requested it. You're destroying her reputation and her career prospects. This vindictive behavior needs to stop. Vindictive? I'm not the one who committed expense fraud, conducted an affair with a married man, or planned to file false abuse charges. I'm just making sure people have accurate information about who they're dealing with. She made mistakes, but she doesn't deserve to have her entire life ruined. She made choices, Margaret. Calculated, deliberate choices over a period of months. Now, she's experiencing the natural consequences of those choices. What do you want from her? An apology? She's willing to apologize. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. She's willing to apologize now that she's facing consequences. Where was that remorse when she was planning to destroy my reputation with false accusations? People do stupid things when they're unhappy in their marriages. People get divorced when they're unhappy in their marriages, Margaret. They don't commit fraud, conduct affairs, and plan to frame their spouses for crimes they didn't commit. Your daughter didn't make a mistake. She made a series of calculated decisions designed to cause maximum harm to people who trusted her. So what happens now? You just keep destroying her life until you feel satisfied? I keep making sure the truth is available to people who need to make informed decisions about Avon's character and reliability. How long that takes depends entirely on how long it takes for her to face the full consequences of her actions. And if she leaves Portside? Starts over somewhere else? Then I hope she's learned something from this experience. But I suspect she hasn't, which means some other community will eventually need the same information I've been providing here. Margaret hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Avon called from her parents' number. Drake, please, this has gone far enough. I know I hurt you, but destroying my entire life isn't going to make you feel better. You're right, I said. It's not going to make me feel better. But it's going to make sure you understand the cost of betraying people who trust you. I understand. I made terrible choices, and I'm sorry. Are you sorry you betrayed me? Or are you sorry you got caught? Both. I'm sorry for all of it. What about the false abuse charges you plan to file? Are you sorry about planning to have me arrested for crimes I didn't commit? Silence. That's what I thought. You're sorry you're facing consequences, Avon. You're not sorry you tried to destroy me. What do you want from me? Nothing. I don't want apologies, explanations, or promises to do better. I want you to experience the full weight of the consequences for your choices. And I want everyone who encounters you in the future to have access to accurate information about your character. For how long? For as long as it takes. I hung up and called Rex with new instructions. I want surveillance on both of them. If they're planning to leave Portside, I want to know where they're going and when. And I want contact information for major employers in whatever cities they're considering. This is getting expensive, Drake. I've got 20 years of savings and no family to support anymore. Money isn't an issue. What if they lawyer up, try to get restraining orders or claim harassment? Everything I'm doing is legal. I'm providing factual information to people who have legitimate reasons to know about it. Employers have the right to know about potential employees' backgrounds. Monroe's wife had the right to know about her husband's affair. Professional organizations have the right to know about members who violate ethical standards. And if they leave town? Then other communities have the right to know who's moving into their neighborhoods and applying for jobs at their companies. Rex was quiet for a moment. You know, most people would have settled for winning the divorce and moving on with their lives. Most people don't have wives who plan to frame them for domestic violence while conducting affairs with married co-workers. Avon didn't just cheat on me, Rex. She tried to destroy me completely. Now she gets to learn what that feels like. Fair enough. I'll have the surveillance reports on your desk tomorrow morning. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over Portside Harbor. The city looked peaceful from up here, but I knew that somewhere out there, two people were discovering that actions have consequences that extend far beyond their original expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You're going to regret pushing us this far. V. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Rex with a note. Evidence of potential harassment. Please document and file with appropriate authorities. Monroe was getting desperate, which meant he was getting dangerous. Time to accelerate the timeline and finish this properly. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to educate the community about the real character of Avon Torin and Vance Monroe, and I intended to be a very thorough teacher. Rex's surveillance report made for fascinating reading over my morning coffee. Monroe had spent the previous evening drinking alone at 3 different bars, making increasingly desperate phone calls, and eventually passing out in his car in a grocery store parking lot. Avon had stayed at her parents' house, making her own round of phone calls to distant relatives and college friends in other cities. They're both looking for escape routes, Rex explained during our morning meeting at the dockyard. Monroe's got a job interview in Atlanta next week, and your wife's been reaching out to contacts in Chicago and Denver. Time to expand our educational outreach program, I said, reviewing the list of companies and contacts they'd been pursuing. I've already prepared information packets for the relevant employers, Rex continued. Complete background reports, documentation of the fraud and affair, copies of court filings, everything a responsible employer would want to know before making a hiring decision. What about their personal networks in those cities? Working on it. Social media makes it easy to identify their friends and professional contacts. A few well-placed conversations should ensure that everyone who matters knows exactly who they're dealing with. Frankie joined us with coffee and an update from his own information network. Monroe's getting desperate. Word is he's been trying to borrow money from former colleagues to pay his legal fees. Nobody's lending. How desperate? Desperate enough to make stupid decisions. My sources say he's been talking about handling the Drake problem permanently. You might want to watch your back. I wasn't particularly concerned about Monroe's threats. 20 years of military training had taught me how to handle desperate men who thought violence was a solution to their problems. But his escalating behavior did present an opportunity. I need you to document every threat, every attempt at intimidation, every contact he makes with me or anyone associated with me, I told Rex. If Monroe wants to add criminal harassment to his legal troubles, I'm happy to help him do that. Already on it. I've got surveillance on him 24/7, and I'm recording all his communications. Guy's building a criminal case against himself. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Cassie Lane stood outside my apartment door, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. Drake, I need to talk to you about Avon and Monroe. There are things you don't know about what they were planning. I invited her in and poured coffee while she organized her thoughts. Cassie had been Avon's closest confidant, which meant she had access to information I couldn't get through surveillance or financial records. They weren't just having an affair, she began. They were planning to destroy you completely. Avon showed me documents they'd prepared. False police reports, fake medical records, fabricated evidence of domestic violence. They were going to have you arrested and charged with felony assault. I know about the false abuse allegations. This was worse than that. They were planning to claim you'd been physically violent for months, that you'd threatened to hurt her if she left, that you'd been stalking her and Monroe. They had fake photos, fake witness statements, everything they needed to put you in prison. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Show me. Cassie pulled out her phone and opened a folder of screenshots. I took pictures of everything before I realized what they were really doing. I thought I was helping a friend escape an abusive marriage. I didn't understand that they were planning to frame an innocent man. The documents were sophisticated. Police report templates with fabricated incident details, medical records showing injuries that had never occurred, witness statements from people who claimed to have seen me threaten Avon. If they'd succeeded in filing these reports, I would have been arrested immediately and faced years in prison. There's more, Cassie continued. They were planning to clean out your joint accounts after you were arrested. Monroe had contacts at financial institutions who were going to help them transfer the money before you could access legal representation. Financial fraud on top of the false criminal charges. They thought they were so clever. Monroe kept saying you were just a simple security guy who wouldn't know how to fight back against sophisticated opponents. Avon said you were too trusting and naive to see it coming. I studied the screenshots, noting the attention to detail and careful planning that had gone into their scheme. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated attempt to destroy my life completely. Why are you showing me this now? Because I realized they were planning to use me as a witness. My name is on some of these fake statements, claiming I saw you threaten Avon at work events. They were going to drag me into their conspiracy, whether I wanted to be involved or not. And you decided you'd rather be on the winning side. I decided I'd rather tell the truth than go to prison for perjury and conspiracy. When Monroe gets arrested for the credit card fraud, he's going to start looking for people to blame. I don't want to be one of them. Cassie handed me a flash drive containing copies of all the documents, along with recorded conversations where Avon and Monroe discussed their plans in detail. The recordings were damning, hours of them laughing about how easy it would be to manipulate the legal system and destroy my reputation. There's something else you should know, she said, as she prepared to leave. They're not done yet. Monroe's convinced that if he can discredit you somehow, it'll help his legal situation. He's been talking about planting evidence in your apartment or your car, something that would make you look like the real criminal. Let him try. I've got security cameras covering every inch of this place, and I sweep my car for foreign objects daily. If Monroe wants to add evidence tampering to his charges, I'll be happy to provide the documentation. After Cassie left, I called Rex with an update and new instructions. I want round-the-clock surveillance on Monroe, and I want to know about every plan he makes before he makes it. If he's planning to plant evidence or escalate his harassment, I want to catch him in the act. This is getting serious, Drake. Maybe it's time to involve law enforcement directly. Not yet. Monroe's building a criminal case against himself with every stupid decision he makes. When we finally hand everything over to the authorities, I want the evidence to be overwhelming. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing all the documentation Cassie had provided. The scope of Avon and Monroe's conspiracy was breathtaking. They'd planned to destroy my life so thoroughly that I would never have recovered. Prison time, financial ruin, destroyed reputation, complete social isolation. They'd thought they were dealing with a naive victim who wouldn't fight back. Instead, they'd targeted someone with the skills and resources to turn their own weapons against them. My phone rang at midnight. Monroe's voice was slurred with alcohol and desperation. You think you're so smart, don't you? Ruining our lives with your little investigation? Vance, calling to threaten me again? You know I record all my calls, right? I'm calling to give you one last chance to back off. Drop the harassment, stop interfering with our job searches, and maybe we can all move on with our lives. Or what? Or you're going to discover that some problems can't be solved with computers and surveillance cameras. Is that a threat of physical violence, Vance? Because I'm recording this conversation, and threatening someone over the phone is a criminal offense. I'm just saying that accidents happen, especially to people who don't know when to mind their own business. I'll make sure to include this recording in the file I'm preparing for the district attorney's office. Thanks for the evidence. I hung up and immediately forwarded the recording to Rex, along with instructions to deliver copies to both the police and Monroe's criminal attorney. If Monroe wanted to add witness intimidation to his legal troubles, I was happy to help him do that. The next morning brought news that Monroe had been arrested for violating the restraining order his wife had filed. Apparently, he'd shown up at their former home at 3 a.m., drunk and demanding to be let inside. The neighbors called police when they heard him shouting threats and throwing rocks at the windows. His bail hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. With his existing criminal charges, the harassment complaints, and now a restraining order violation, Monroe was looking at significant jail time even before his divorce proceedings concluded. Avon called me that afternoon, her voice shaking with panic. Drake, please. Vance has lost his mind. He's talking about doing something terrible to you. I'm scared he's going to hurt someone. Are you calling to warn me, or are you calling to distance yourself from whatever he's planning? Both. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. This whole situation has gotten completely out of control. It got out of control the moment you decided to frame me for domestic violence while conducting an affair with a married man. Everything that's happened since then has been the natural consequence of those choices. But Vance is talking about violence. Real violence. That's not what I wanted. What did you think would happen when you helped him plan to destroy my life? Did you imagine he'd just accept defeat gracefully when your scheme failed? I don't know what I thought. I just wanted out of our marriage. You could have filed for divorce, Avon. Instead, you chose to commit fraud, adultery, and conspiracy. Now your boyfriend's facing prison time and you're both unemployable. Those are the consequences of your choices. What if I testified against him? Told the police about everything we planned, everything he made me do? You mean everything you both planned together? The recordings Cassie provided make it pretty clear that you were an equal partner in the conspiracy. Silence. Here's what's going to happen, Avon. Monroe's going to prison for fraud, harassment, and restraining order violations. You're going to remain unemployed and unemployable until every potential employer in the country knows exactly who you are and what you've done. And I'm going to make sure that anyone who encounters either of you in the future has access to complete information about your character and reliability. For how long? For as long as it takes for both of you to face the full consequences of your actions. Monroe chose to escalate this situation with threats and harassment. Now he gets to learn what happens when you threaten someone who's better at this game than you are. I hung up and called Rex with final instructions. It's time to involve law enforcement directly. I want everything we've documented delivered to the district attorney's office, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and the state attorney general's office. Complete package. Fraud, conspiracy, harassment, evidence tampering, everything. What about your wife? Include her in the conspiracy charges. She was an equal partner in planning to frame me, and she participated willingly in the fraud scheme. Let the prosecutors decide how to handle her cooperation. This is going to destroy both of them completely. Good. They tried to destroy me completely. Now they get to experience what that feels like. The trap had been set, baited, and sprung. Monroe and Avon had walked into it willingly, driven by their own arrogance and desperation. Now all that remained was watching them face the consequences of their choices. Justice was about to be served, and it was going to be thorough. The morning of Monroe's bail hearing, I sat in the courtroom gallery watching justice unfold with methodical precision. Monroe looked terrible, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled suit that had seen better days, flanked by a public defender who clearly wished he was anywhere else. The prosecutor read the charges with clinical efficiency. Credit card fraud, identity theft, harassment, stalking, violation of restraining orders, and conspiracy to file false police reports. The evidence file was 3 inches thick. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, the defendant has shown a pattern of escalating criminal behavior and has made specific threats against witnesses in this case. The state requests that bail be denied pending trial. Monroe's attorney made a half-hearted argument about community ties and presumption of innocence, but the recorded phone threats I'd provided made his position indefensible. The judge denied bail and remanded Monroe to county jail pending trial. As they led him away in handcuffs, Monroe looked directly at me and mouthed something that was probably profane. I smiled and gave him a small wave. 20 years of military service had taught me the satisfaction of watching a well-executed operation reach its conclusion. Rex met me outside the courthouse with updates on the broader investigation. FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is very interested in the conspiracy charges, he reported. Apparently, planning to file false police reports while committing expense fraud hits several federal statutes. Monroe's looking at 10 to 15 years if he's convicted on all counts. What about Avon? She's been offered a plea deal. Testify against Monroe, provide complete cooperation with the investigation, and she might avoid prison time. But she'd still face probation, restitution, and a felony conviction on her record. We walked to my car while Rex continued his briefing. There's something else you should know. The story's gone national. Business journals are calling it one of the most comprehensive corporate fraud cases they've seen this year. Your wife's name is going to be permanently associated with this scandal. Good. Anyone who Googles her name for the next 20 years will know exactly who they're dealing with. That afternoon, I received a call from Margaret Winters, Avon's mother. Her tone had shifted from demanding to pleading. Drake, the FBI agents want to interview Avon about the conspiracy charges. She's terrified she's going to prison. Please, isn't there something you can do to help her? She can help herself by telling the truth and accepting responsibility for her actions. The prosecutors seem willing to work with cooperative witnesses. But a felony conviction will ruin her life. She'll never be able to get a decent job or rebuild her reputation. Margaret, your daughter planned to have me arrested for felony domestic violence charges based on fabricated evidence. If her plan had succeeded, I would be in prison right now facing years of incarceration for crimes I didn't commit. She's getting exactly the consideration she was willing to give me. None. She was confused and manipulated by that Monroe man. The recordings suggest otherwise. Avon was an enthusiastic participant in planning my destruction. She laughed about how easy it would be to manipulate the legal system and destroy my reputation. Those are her words, Margaret, not Monroe's. What do you want from her? What would it take for you to ask the prosecutors to go easy on her? I considered the question seriously. What did I want from Avon? An apology? An admission of guilt? Some gesture of remorse that would never undo the damage she'd tried to cause? I want her to face the full consequences of her choices, I said finally. No plea deals, no reduced charges, no special consideration because she's willing to betray her co-conspirator. I want her to experience exactly what she planned for me. Complete destruction of her reputation, financial ruin, and social isolation. That's cruel. That's justice. Your daughter tried to destroy an innocent man's life for personal gain. Now she gets to learn what that feels like. Margaret hung up without another word. An hour later, Avon called from her attorney's office. Drake, I need you to know that I never wanted it to go this far. When Vance suggested framing you for abuse, I thought it was just talk. I never believed we'd actually do it. The recordings suggest otherwise. You spent hours planning the details of my destruction. You laughed about how naive and trusting I was. You discussed cleaning out our accounts after I was arrested. That doesn't sound like reluctant participation. I was in love. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to commit systematic fraud, fabricate evidence, and plan to perjure yourself in court. Love doesn't excuse conspiracy, Avon. The prosecutors want me to testify against Vance. If I cooperate fully, they'll reduce the charges to misdemeanors. Congratulations, you get to betray another person who trusted you. That seems to be your specialty. What else am I supposed to do? Go to prison to protect a man who's already thrown me under the bus? You're supposed to face the consequences of your choices. Both of you plan to destroy me, and both of you should face appropriate punishment for that conspiracy. So, you won't support a plea agreement? I'll be providing a victim impact statement that explains exactly what you and Monroe plan to do to me. The prosecutors and judge can decide what punishment fits those crimes. That evening, I sat in my apartment writing the victim impact statement that would be read at both sentencing hearings. It was important to document not just the financial and legal damage they'd attempted, but the psychological impact of discovering that someone you'd trusted for 20 years had been planning your complete destruction. The statement ran 12 pages and included specific examples of their conspiracy, quotes from the recorded conversations, and a detailed explanation of how their plan would have affected every aspect of my life. I wanted the court to understand that this wasn't a simple case of adultery or financial fraud. It was a calculated attempt to destroy another human being for personal gain. Rex called with a final update on the investigation. Monroe's attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors aren't interested. They want to make an example of this case, show that conspiracy and fraud have serious consequences. What's the timeline for trial? Monroe's trial starts in 6 weeks. Your wife's hearing is scheduled for the following month, assuming she doesn't take the plea deal. And if she does take the deal? She testifies against Monroe, pleads guilty to reduced charges, serves 2 years probation, and pays restitution. But she still has a felony conviction on her record. Either way, her reputation is permanently destroyed. Completely. The media coverage alone ensures that anyone who Googles her name will know about this case. She'll never work in PR or any professional field that requires trust and credibility. I walked out onto my balcony and looked over Portside Harbor. The city lights reflected off the water like scattered diamonds, beautiful and peaceful. Somewhere out there, 2 people were facing the consequences of their choices to betray trust and destroy innocent lives. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You won. Are you satisfied now?" I didn't recognize the number, but the tone suggested it was from Avon. I deleted the message without responding. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about justice and consequences. The next morning brought news that Monroe had been found guilty on all counts. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning unanimous verdicts on fraud, conspiracy, harassment, and evidence tampering charges. His sentencing was scheduled for the following week. Avon's plea hearing was that afternoon. I attended as the victim, watching as she stood before the judge and admitted her guilt to conspiracy charges, fraud, and attempted perjury. Her voice was barely audible as she acknowledged her role in planning to destroy my life with fabricated evidence. The judge accepted her plea agreement, but made it clear that cooperation with prosecutors didn't erase the seriousness of her crimes. "Mrs. Torren," he said, "you participated in a conspiracy to destroy an innocent man's life through false accusations and fabricated evidence. The fact that your plan failed doesn't diminish the malicious intent behind your actions. While the court acknowledges your cooperation with this investigation, you should understand that your choices have consequences that extend far beyond this courtroom." She was sentenced to 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution for the financial fraud. More importantly, she now had a permanent felony conviction that would follow her for the rest of her life. Monroe's sentencing the following week was more dramatic. The judge called his crimes a calculated attempt to destroy multiple lives for personal gain and sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. He would serve at least 8 years before being eligible for parole. As they led Monroe away in shackles, he looked at me one final time. There was no defiance left in his expression, just the hollow look of a man who had finally understood the cost of his choices. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunshine, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The system had worked exactly as it was supposed to. Evidence had been gathered, presented, and evaluated. Justice had been served proportionally and appropriately. Rex met me at the dockyard that evening for a final debrief over whiskey and congratulations. "So, what's next for you?" he asked. "New city? Fresh start?" "I'm staying in Portside. This is my home, and I'm not the one who should be running away." "What about your wife? Think you'll hear from her again?" "Probably not. She's got 3 years of probation to serve and a felony record to explain to anyone who'll listen. I suspect she'll be too busy dealing with the consequences of her choices to bother me. And if she tries to contact you, then she'll discover that restraining orders work both ways." We drank in comfortable silence, watching the evening crowd filter into the bar. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, most of them probably unaware that justice had been served in their community. Mrs. Vanders knocked on my door the next morning with coffee and final gossip from the building's social network. "Well," she said, settling into her usual chair, "I suppose that's the end of that drama. Though I must say it was the most interesting thing to happen in this building in decades. Glad I could provide entertainment." "Oh, it was more than entertainment, dear. It was education. Everyone in the building learned something important about the consequences of betraying trust. She pulled out a newspaper clipping from the local business journal. They're calling it the Tor and Monroe conspiracy case. Your names are going to be remembered for quite some time. Only one of those names deserves to be remembered positively. Indeed, though I suspect people will remember this as a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate quiet, trustworthy people. After she left, I sat on my balcony with my morning coffee, looking out over Portside Harbor. The water was calm, reflecting the morning sky like a mirror. Peaceful and beautiful, just as it should be. My phone sat silent on the table beside me. No threatening calls from Monroe, no desperate pleas from Avon, no angry demands from her family, just silence and peace. Justice had been served completely and appropriately. Monroe would spend the next 8 to 12 years in federal prison learning that actions have consequences. Avon would spend the next 3 years on probation, discovering that betraying trust carries a permanent price. And I would spend the rest of my life knowing that when someone tried to destroy me completely, I had the skills, resources, and patience to turn their own weapons against them. Checkmate. The game was over, and the right side had won.